Thank you very much for joining us here today. So I just want each of you to take perhaps 2 minutes to just tell us a little bit about, you've already spoken, you've told us what you do. But for the purpose of the panel and in the context of how we're talking about the structures, the systems and processes, take 2 minutes to just tell us, to introduce yourself in relation to how you are addressing those elements, what you are doing within your workspaces. And I'll start with Kirsty, considering you haven't told us.
Yes. So we started, as Danielle kind of said, the DIveIN program 3 years ago, and the last 2 years we've been working with Michael and Fiona, and we have been taking people through a variety of workshops, quite intensive workshops, and at that kind of senior leadership level, because we know that's where we can really start to see the change, and then from that, people have gone on to kind of adapt D&I policy and things like that. So the DIveIN program will continue to be running, and we're here to basically support and find the expertise that you need regardless of where you are on your diversity and inclusion journey, both individually and with your organisations. The last 2 years we've been focusing on ethnic minorities within the workplace, and we'll kind of continue to do that, but then also within any other areas as well. We're always here to support, and BEST very much it's one of our core values, is to create diverse and inclusive spaces. So it's what we live and breathe every day at work and at home. So that's how we go into it.
Thank you, Kirsty. And I like that you said, at work and at home, because these conversations need to be ongoing everywhere. Ollie.
Yes. So at the Association for Black and Minority Ethnic Engineers, we run events that achieve the 3 goals that I mentioned earlier: attraction, retention, and progression. And so that's everything from working in schools to run events for young people. Some of our first events that we ran were with supplementary education programs in Croydon. These days, nationally, we're running programs in different parts of the country with young people. It happens that in many cases, areas that have high population of ethnic minority people also tend to be areas where there is a lot of social deprivation, and that's still the case in most cities in the country. And so the programs that we run aren't just therefore for minority ethnic people, but just all the kids in the schools that we go to. So in the last year, for example, we've set up a new hub in Edinburgh in the West Wales area, where again there's 20% of the most deprived people in Scotland sort of live. It's in that category, and so we run events for schools and events to inspire. And during the lockdown, we found we could even do this in a more effective way using the online platforms. We run events at university, aimed at bridging that gap between what happens, the reason you've got so many people going to university and people not making it into jobs. And so we run programs around that. And we also have a program called Transcend for senior technical professionals looking to move further into leadership. And we do all of this by working with partners, so about 77 organizations, where we're constantly running lunch and learn sessions, workshops, and things just to educate, because if you can have a diverse workforce, you can get inclusive recruitment, right? But if the experience of people that come into the companies isn't very positive, they will come in and they will go. And it will lead to what the Atkins report from last year referred to as career deflection. So there's a huge part of dealing with what we can do as individuals to, if you like, get past some of the barriers within the system. But then we also want to engage the system and engage our organizations so that understanding is there. So it's a case of the both and, not the either or.
Oh, fantastic, thank you. And Aisha?
So something that I didn't get the chance to talk about when I was speaking is the work that I started doing whilst I was at university within this sort of space. So during the height of the Black Lives Matter movement back in 2020, myself and a group of friends founded the Black Ed movement in my university. And it's first of all started off with a petition that we wrote to the Vice Chancellor, who a couple months later ended up giving me an award. But the Vice Chancellor, we wrote a petition, and we managed to get 8,000 people signing it. Basically just calling out the lack of anti-racist work within our university, the University of Edinburgh. And through that, we gained some traction, and we got invited to actually sit on the university-wide ED&I kind of task force, which was tasked with really trying to work on some of the pointers that we raised in the letter, but also trying to see how they can listen to the student voice as well. Because despite University of Edinburgh being like one of the top places to study in the whole of the UK, it is still less diverse compared to Cambridge and Oxford, which are supposed to be like, the ones that are backwards, but Edinburgh is like struggling there. And after I did that, I went on to run for a student representative role, and I ran for the role of Vice President of Welfare at my university students' union, and I was elected. I was the first ever person from Africa in the whole of my university's 438 years of history to be given, I wasn't just given, I actually ran, and I did a whole campaign around it, and it was during COVID, and I went on social media and I made a campaign video where I actually wrote lines for. So basically, I took the song "Levitating" by Dua Lipa, and I took the sort of track, and I wrote a script that was based off of my campaign points, and I made a campaign video, and I shared it on YouTube. I shared it on social media, and I made a lot of noise about the fact that I was running. So I wasn't just handed the role because I was Black, Muslim, and a woman. I was actually handed the role because I worked really, really hard for it. And off of the back of that experience, I was able to kind of sit in strategic spaces where the key decision that governs the way the university is run are made, and I was able to kind of really try to advance the work on an institutional and structural level as well, but also on an individual level, because I got to have one-on-one conversations with the senior leadership team at the university as well. And I've since finished from Edinburgh University, but off the back of that, I also do some work with an organization called Advance HE, and I deliver a workshop on intersectionality, really trying to get people to understand the really nuanced elements that comes with doing work like this. Yes, there is the issue of sexism, but what does it look like when some people have to face sexism, racism, and a couple other issues as well, and how can we be sort of conscious of that nuance such that we can really do the work that is going to be as effective as possible. So that's a bit about me, and now I mean I'm actually very crazy because I went from trying to be an architect to now I want to be a CEO of a robotics company, and I'm trying to do something that's never been done before. So I am what they call textbook crazy, but you have to be crazy. You have to have a little bit of crazy in you to have a tough skin to thrive in the world as we know of it now. And the the key word there really is thrive, because we don't want to just survive anymore. For a very long time, women and people from underrepresented backgrounds have been trying to survive, begging for people to bring us and accept us within these spaces. But really what we need now is for us to be able to exist and thrive and breathe fresh air, please, because it is hard enough trying to just be yourself, and then you add all these layered issues that we have to deal with. So I'm really glad to be here, and I'm really looking forward to kind of just moving the needle through the conversation we're having today.
Yes, thank you. And you said something there that you had actually talked about before, the bit about continually, and Ollie spoke about it as well, the leaking pathway into these spaces. And you talk about you studied as an architect, you're now leaving the industry. And we continually see people leaving the industry, even not getting to the industry, and it's in the environment in which we are working, we need to consider what do we do to ensure that something changes. I remember when we were starting this work, we started off doing employability work, and we quickly changed within a few years. We decided we don't want to do employability work. We started doing workforce diversification, where we work with the employers and then bring the candidates in. Because there's this continuous deficit model where you're continually training people as if they're deficit of something, but they're not going to go anywhere. And so we see young people leaving. Not sure if our son will stay. I'm not sure if young people will stay. I'm not even sure if people who are training want to stay in the industry. And you talked about it. How do we move that structural, systemic issue? What are your thoughts around how we move that for people here that are coming from organizations and businesses that are trying to increase representation? And I need to say representation is not everything.
Yes.
Representation is just one element. And even in representation, you need to consider who are you bringing into the representation. In Scotland here, we see racialization, where they bring in people who are more likely to be like the Scottish people. So they employ those that have a more Scottish accent. They are not as dark as Fiona and Alicia or Ollie. So we need to think about those things. So how do we move it from the structural bit to become more inclusive and meaningfully inclusive? Ollie.
Yeah, so an analogy, and both of you, yourself and Aisha have spoken about this. The analogy is one of a house that was designed maybe at a certain time when the occupants that the architect had in mind was a certain type of person, and then somebody who is disabled moves into that house. And just naturally, by virtue of the fact that they can't walk up 3 flights of stairs, or can't reach some of the places that you expect the keys to be hung, or can't use the bathroom in the normal way, you're naturally creating an environment there that is not inclusive. So you can almost have a system that is discriminatory by default. And so what we do, first thing we do, is we acknowledge that is the problem. How do we find out the state of the problem? We listen. We listen to the experiences, the lived experiences of people around us. So one way of ensuring that you're creating those spaces to listen is reverse mentoring. I've spoken to leaders. I was speaking to some leaders just yesterday who started to sort of be reverse mentored by, in one case, a young black woman and this white man, male leader. It just broadened his understanding of the issues. So there first needs to be an acknowledgement of the problem, quantitatively and qualitatively. Quite often we talk about the state of our companies and we think primarily in terms of figures, but actually the stories and experiences that people have tell us just as much, if not more. So we need to go through that process of understanding the status quo. The second thing we then do is come up with a plan. What do we need as an organization in order to operate? What is our raison d'etre? Why are we here? And when we start to think about what we need in order to operate, we think about all of the elements that we need in order to further that operation. And one of those has got to be having an inclusive environment. Imagine a workplace where everyone who comes in genuinely feels when they're leaving at the end of the day that what they do is vital for the way that place operates. If they came up with some crazy or maybe not so crazy ideas, that they will have somebody who will listen and says, you know what, I think I found a way we can do that. Or if there's an environment in which people know that if they make a contribution as a woman, they make a contribution in the workplace, it's not going to be deaf silence, and then all of a sudden some other person makes the same point and says, oh, why didn't we think of that? It reminds me of a quote that somebody said. It says, that's a really good point, Mildred. Would any man in the room like to make it? Because ultimately, that is what we get to. So if we have that sort of environment, people stay. It's going to be good for business, surely. So I think it's that connecting of the dots, acknowledging that there is a problem, measuring qualitatively and quantitatively where we are, so that we really understand the problem, and then thinking about the ways in which those practices actually aren't an extra nice to have. They're not a charity thing. They're an operational necessity to maximize the potential of everyone in the office. And if we start to realize that, we link those efforts to the profit margin and to the way we move forward, and that becomes a good imperative for us to go ahead with it. So that'd be my response.
Thank you, Oli. And you've mentioned some key things there: listening and acknowledging. I know that we've been in rooms where they bring us in as an expert in anti-racism, and then as we're speaking, somehow the eyes start to glaze over what we're saying, and we become the learners suddenly, and the listeners have become the experts. So listening is quite a challenge. So Kirsty, what I want to ask you around that is, as Oli speaks about these things that we need to listen, we need to acknowledge, what has it been like in Boston, in your work with the rest of the industry, in that element of acknowledging, listening, and changing things?
Yeah, I mean, I think from, the first time when we probably met, Fiona and Michael, you came in and you did a session with us, and the difference in kind of quality of training. Probably all organisations, you'll get an online module to do in ED&I, and it has really probably not very much effect on you. You'll click through the slides, but then you come and you do a session that's your lived experiences, where you have the knowledge and then you engage the room and you speak with people that they can understand it, even if they've maybe not experienced it, and then they start to really see how important it is to be having these conversations. And when we spoke on the podcast recently, we were talking about the importance of education and how this conversation is for everyone. The leaders can make the decisions, but this conversation is for everyone. So for me, it's about the quality of the training, and that's not something you're going to get probably from an online module. You need to be having these really kind of immersive workshop experiences.
Thank you, Kirsty. And I'm going to prepare you. So after I've asked Aisha, you have an opportunity to ask your questions. So be ready with your questions. We have a short amount of time, and I want to make sure that you're ready with your questions. So before I come to you, Aisha, thank you very much, Kirsty. What you've said there is really important. We always advocate for some immersive training. It's really important for people to understand what it means. When we talk about anti-racism, we're talking about combating. We're talking about structural change. We're talking about understanding those 4 elements and working with those 4 elements. Sometimes when we talk about anti-racism and inclusion work, people just bring people, they think we can just bring people in. And I like what you said, Aisha, earlier. You said, I was not just handed the role.
Yeah.
And it's been known for Black people and people of color to go into an organization and then be treated as if, oh, you're only here because you're Black. We have to work so hard before you can be accepted, acknowledged, and then allowed to be in that role. So, Aisha, same question to you. What do we do to challenge and change and structurally change the institution that you seem to be running away from now?
I'm not running away. I'm here, guys.
You're not running. You're still here. You've been pushed out.
I think what happened to me personally really was that I found something that excites me perhaps a lot more than the reality of being an architect does. And hopefully in the next couple of years, the actual reality of what that, day-to-day activity is going to be like would have moved on, and we wouldn't have to be dealing with stories like the one Ollie was telling about the conversations he was having and how he was just there to work. He was just trying to, work on chemical engineering and work on exciting projects, but he had to be dealing with these sort of microaggressions on a day-to-day basis. But from my point of view, really, I think, like Ollie has already spoken about, we wouldn't be able to talk about solving a problem if we are still adamant about the fact that there's not really a problem. If there's still an iota of doubt inside of our hearts that there is a problem. And unless we really do that, I think we can't really even start to have these workshops where people come and actually sit around the table and brainstorm. We are all smart people here, right? So once we do get to that stage where we are thinking critically, right, how can we be part of the solution? How can we try to understand the really complex issue that we're dealing with here and try to solve it? I mean, it's not rocket science, although it can seem like it from the outside looking in, but it does get easier. Yeah. And it could be as simple as having a conversation with a colleague at work, trying to understand a bit more about them. This is something that I noticed even in the Hollywood space, is that the Black character doesn't really have a character development, and you find that they don't really talk about the actual identity of the person of the token person of color or the token person that was just added in to sort of spice up the other main actor's story. And I find that to be something that I also see in real life. Like, how can we try to understand people who are different from us better? How can we try to form relationships and deep connections? For a very long time, like, I was so nervous about moving abroad because I was thinking like, oh my God, I'm going to be so different, and like, I'm going to struggle to like have friends, and people are going to be so different from me. But I've been here for the past five and a half years, and I have friends from all over the world, and I love that. My flatmates, one is from India, one is from China, and I have been able to immerse myself in their culture. I have learned how to cook food from different parts of the world. I am a curious person because I am really passionate about trying to connect with people. And when you connect with people and you have empathy with them, it becomes a lot easier to really listen when they try to explain to you some of the nuances, some of the really, often complex things that they're having to face. And then it becomes easier because you have humanized them. They're not just some random person from Africa who is, who's so different from you. They are similar to you. They also like dancing Scottish Cayley, and they also love eating rice, and there's so many things you guys have in common. So and I think when we look at the fact that people are leaving, and we look at the fact that the company culture is a big part of that, the more we can make people that are already within this space. Like, I look around this room and there's so many, I can already see people from different backgrounds here, right? Those people who are already within this space, despite all of the odds, what are we doing to make sure that they feel a sense of belonging? What are we doing as a company to not just celebrate Christmas, but also to mark the fact that there is Eid, and that people in our work from a different background are having something else? Like, how do we make sure that we are celebrating the diversity? And like I said when I spoke, diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. We need to be proud of the diversity that we have. We need to celebrate it. We need to highlight it. We need to listen to the stories and tell the stories, so that when someone in a high school somewhere is thinking about it, they can go on your company's website and they see someone like them and they think, I can do that too.
Yes. Thank you very much. And on inclusion, I will add to it, not just being asked to dance, but you could also go further and allow people to choose the song to dance to. So we can take it a bit further. But you've mentioned some very key elements there: curiosity, connection, empathy. Those are things that we talk about in our training as well. And you've also talked about something that is really, really key, which is humanization. For a long time, people have been dehumanized. And when we go into the historical elements of racism, actually racism dehumanized and aimed to dehumanize people of color. So it's not just a story, it was actually written and suggested that biologically we are subhuman. It was written within the laws enshrined in what then became slave trade. So understanding that historical context allows us to think about where we go from here. That's why when we're talking about change, we're talking about all four elements of undoing racism. I like what somebody said. Somebody described anti-racism as like the Newton's law of motion, where we have to meet it with an equally opposing force. So racism must be met with an equally opposing force, anti-racism, to stop it continuing. So, questions? Do you have any questions here?
So, whilst it would be very tempting for me to tell you what my organisation does, there is actually an organisation called Black Professionals Scotland.
Yes.
And they post quite a lot of, they've got a portal, and you can go in there and advertise the jobs there. Because what that would mean is generally the kind of people that you would like to see. Because I can understand that sometimes when you go to the regular channels, you may not necessarily get all the people that you, or at least not have a diverse enough pool just to interview. So I'd suggest that you go onto the Black Professional Scotland website, post jobs on there, and hopefully more people apply. For jobs that are more kind of engineering and technology related or require some sort of tech ability, then there is the AFB UK website. You can post that as well, and I can tell you more about that. But there are many organisations like that who can help in that process.
Thank you. Immediate solution.
I have something to add on the second part of her question. So just touching on the language side of things. From my point of view, whenever I'm applying for jobs, I always look at the company's website to see, do they even have a policy that is showing the work that they're actively doing about this? And it could even be as simple as just having a note at the end of the actual ad that sort of states and the fact that you guys are committed to hiring from a diverse range of people. And I think that sort of, rings a very positive bell in my head that says, okay, cool, right? Like, if I do apply, they're at the very least aware of, this sort of nuanced fact, which is the fact that people from my background are less likely to actually apply, so I'll be more willing to consider putting in an application.
Yeah. And young people are not playing. You're not going to invite them into a space only for them to discover that the space is not inclusive. People will leave, especially young people, but everybody else as well. So make sure that you actually have prepared your workplace for the people that you're inviting in, is what I would add. Yes, at the back.
So one thing that would typically happen on a construction site is you have many processes that are often aimed at ensuring that there is safety all through the day. So you'll do your toolbox talks, you'll do your risk assessments, you'll have just things that are reflective of the behaviors that you expect to see during the day. So one of the things we can do is incorporate an element of that into the process. So if, for example, quite often on the site you'll have various subcontractors providing services to yourselves, and half the time most of the people who are working on the site aren't actually people who are employed directly by the main contractor. They might be people who are subcontracted. Okay, well, there is an element of you as the client in that context making it clear the kind of values that you expect, and you can embed that contractually from the get-go. So people know that when they're coming onto this site, sexist, racist, homophobic kind of jibes here and there are not going to be acceptable, and it's going to cost the company if that. So if you set those expectations from the very start and you find ways of embedding them throughout the day, it becomes easier. The other thing is your leaders, supervisors, people on site. If they had attended sessions like this, I really like the word immersive training that's been mentioned before. Attended some of these so that they're looking out for some of those things. They can pick things up when they happen. Because yes, in a site environment, it can be very difficult, especially because it's not like you have everyone working for the same company and therefore held to the same standards. But yeah, if we embed into the contracts that we have between main contractor and subcontractor some elements of social value, which should include an element of sort of inclusive behaviors. I mean, no one would expect any of the guys who work on your site to basically run towards the building site without a hard hat on or without the right PPE. So if we can use the same channels to communicate some of these expectations, that may be important. The other thing to look out for, and this is relating to mental health, mental safety is something that is becoming very, very important in the work environment, and especially on sites. And sometimes people have behaviors or show behaviors or anger at a moment of extreme stress, but there might be tons of other things that are happening in the background. Well, again, if we've received enough training to be aware and to pick up on some of these things, we can maybe address them sooner. So it comes down to, I think, setting expectations at a contractual level, embedding them in the normal activities that you would do throughout the day, training your leaders to pick things up when they're happening.
Yeah, no, totally agree. I think it's about making these conversations as important as the health and safety ones that are happening in those toolbox talks. And it's also like, is site ready? So maybe from a woman's point of view, are there those toilets? Are there all the amenities that women need? Because sometimes that can still happen. Is all the health and safety protection, is it fit for a woman to wear? Because again, are we thinking about that? So, and it can be the same across all different minority groups and characteristics, and taking into account, so if a woman is pregnant or if she has a baby, can she go and express somewhere if she's working on site? So it's about, are we site ready, and then making sure we're embedding all of these conversations into everything that we do.
And the things you both said are really key around that. What I'll add is, no matter how good you think you are and how fantastic your workplace is and how friendly it is, if you haven't had any anti-racism training, you don't actually know where racism presents itself.
Yes.
So you really need to consider that. And I know that it costs money, but if we truly want to be anti-racist, we need to invest in the education. We need to invest, and you need good quality training as well, because sometimes you do diversity and inclusion. Diversity doesn't equal inclusion, neither does diversity and inclusion equal anti-racism. Diversity is a variety of things or a variety of people. Inclusion is allowing people to be part of that, but anti-racism looks at historical context, it looks at the legal elements, it looks at the processes, it also looks at the power dynamics. If I come into a workplace and I'm the only person of color, what power dynamics are playing into that, and what empowers people to behave a certain way. So education is really key, and training does not finalize it. It's an ongoing learning process. But you also have to be ready to make mistakes. The mistakes will be made, but we can always learn from those mistakes. So values, expectations must be clear to all staff members. We all have a diversity and inclusion policy, and nobody knows what that is or what it means. We need to rip it up and do an anti-racism and inclusion policy. So have a think around what you have in place to prepare for that workplace for people to come in and feel that they're part of that journey.
One thing I wanted to quickly
It's Ollie and then
just add to that, just from a site context. We would usually assess how well a construction process has gone by looking at things like near misses, lost time incidents. Can we start to maybe think about some of these kind of incidents as well? Because those are workforce issues, and they affect morale and and could have an impact on the success of the project. So maybe that's something that I haven't seen yet, but maybe it's going to start here.
And something else that comes to mind is, if in the rare case something does happen, is there a very clear policy where people can easily go and kind of flag that something did happen, such that we are able to pick up on things when they do happen? Because if something happened and we see it with the case of the Bartlett School of Architecture, it took someone coming out and actually saying, this is what actually happened to me years ago, back when I was still a student, for there to be like real work to look at the real structural issue that existed. So how do we make sure that people are able to give feedback, or people are able to kind of give a report based on their experiences as well?
Yeah, and I'm not even going to go into the number of things I never talk about, and I'm an anti-racism educator. Please, in the corner there, you had a question.
I think that's really, really great, because as an African, there's so many barriers to even accessing opportunities. I mean, there's the visa issues, there's like the cultural difference issues. So that's really, really great to learn about. But I think there's definitely stuff that could be done to really review like the actual handbook that currently exists, the current policies that actually exist, and really try to make sure that in the structures, like in the policies, it's actually factored in. Like this company is going through a period of change where we're trying to kind of bring in people from different backgrounds. How can we make sure that our policy kind of factors that in, and how do we communicate that? Because being the first person to come into a space comes with a lot of challenges. But I think having a culture that is conscious of that and that is empathetic of that makes it a lot more easier. So listening and actually trying to understand like what support do they need, what added levels of support can be given that would help them adapt to this new culture, but also to feel a sense of belonging as well. It's gonna take time, but I think being willing is definitely a first step, and I think it's something that can be achieved in the long run.
Thank you. Anybody want to?
Just to build on what Aisha's has been saying there, there are obviously a lot of providers, Michael, Fiona, and those organisations that can help in terms of the education piece for the rest of the company. But a number of areas that you may want to also sort of spend some time in, I'm pretty sure you probably already do, are things like psychological safety. If we create an environment where people at least know that they can admit to something that's gone wrong without fearing that there will be real repercussions, then they're more likely to do so. So can we spend some time actually looking at what psychological safety means for the various contexts within your organisation? The second aspect is in terms of pathways to progression, career-wise. A big challenge that people have is that they fear that the routes to promotion aren't always transparent. So are there ways in which you can ensure that everyone knows within the company that there should be nothing other than their ability and competence that matters when it comes to how far they could go within the organisation? So that has to come with a strategic plan. How are you going to ensure that is the case? And then I'm also then thinking about other things like the pay gaps and pay gap reviews, just to ensure that again, you will know compared to some of the others at the same level as this gentleman or the person you hired, how well they're doing, and if we can ensure that. So those are the three things I would add to what Aisha has already said.
About the schools and universities element to it, because that's what we set out to do, really call for the fact that there needs to be some education happening. We need to make sure that we are producing graduates that are able to go into the workforce aware of these structural issues, and I would say that my university has since started to kind of create some work, some training resource around that. But it is slow, and I think we definitely need to see more of it. But you've raised a very valid point, because I think if we can start raising awareness from a very early age, then it's something that just sort of naturally grows eventually.
Yeah, it's very disappointing that it's not happening more across curriculums on all different levels of education.
Kirsty, were you about to say something?
Yeah, no, I was just, it's not something that, what you're saying, not adopted into schools.
Yeah.
Just now, and it is something that definitely needs to be pushed forward. But I think when you do some of the training this afternoon, and when we've done it previously, is you'll find that you'll take these conversations home, and that's where I think it has the biggest effect, because you'll speak to your kids, your partner, and then they go and be like, oh, my partner had this conversation. And I think that's where the difference can kind of really happen just now, whilst we don't have it in a kind of school, college, university curriculum.
Yeah, that's right. I think academia is a whole other story. Even just when you think about it, if you come from an African university, say I'll speak for Uganda, where I come from. If I come from a Ugandan university with a master's, it will not be acknowledged here. Yeah, it will not be acknowledged within the systems here. So I can come to the university and do another degree or whatever, but the validity of it, it's only acknowledged in as far as it allows you to pay more money to study more, but will not be valid in any other element. So that's a whole other story. In schools, we're pushing for anti-racism education. In schools and in education, it's not yet happening. So it's exceptional. It's the slowest pace in most of other areas, to be honest. I think private sector is pushing faster than public sector, and in academia and all those other elements. So, but thank you for raising. It's really important.
But
for
even
us
having
to
a chapter, if you look at some of the materials now, lot of students are learning online, interactive. You had a chapter that you could read, and then a video of people like yourself talking about how it made them feel and their experiences. That would be enough just to open the door a little change.
I actually.
Oh no, you go.
You've been wanting to.
I'm always wanting to speak, so you can just ignore that.
I was just going to add that I actually worked on a module that was to be released to students, but it's obviously optional. Where they can actually like listen to lived experiences, where people kind of just paint a more colorful picture of what it is exactly that we're talking about, because there's been quite a few incidents in my university that kind of didn't really kind of showed the fact that then there needed to be more education, but you do find that there is counter kind of forces that are trying to kind of argue against having such courses, and there's a whole discourse and debates that's happening about should that even be something that we're talking about, and we face a lot of backlash whilst we're doing the work we were doing at the Black Ed movement, but it just goes to show some of the reasons why the work is happening really, really slowly, because there's a lot of pushback. And I think it's people like us who are here who understand the fact that there is a problem, going out there and making a case, making an argument, leveraging the privilege that comes with being non-Black, and speaking up for us, but also kind of listening as well, such that we can communicate that message really, really clearly.
I let Ollie speak.
Yeah. No, the advanced HE that Aisha referred to is actually open to all universities, and some universities have signed up to it, and they're actually doing something about it, like the University of Dundee where I teach. But then there are other universities that have signed up to it, and it's really just a tick box exercise. At school level, Wales did introduce, of course, this into the curriculum. So at least we've got a model there that should Scotland, England decide to take up, they can use that model.
I'll also add that I'm a JMS scholar, so in case they are watching, I really am a James McEwan scholar with University of Glasgow, and they've done some work around reparation, and so Black students like myself can apply for a PhD to try and increase representation. So there is some decolonization and anti-racism work going on. It's still quite slow, but hopefully we're starting to have those conversations. And now I'm curious about the big question.
Here's a big question. I'll talk about two key aspects of it. So it's always important to remind people when we talk about net zero, the energy transition, and all of the climate change, that is primarily it should be a global conversation, and the people who are worst affected by it are people in the global south. And that means a couple of things. It means that our outlook should necessarily include people from those areas who are affected, so that we are providing a broader conversation. But then there is the other aspect of this, which is the bigger challenge. It's around innovation. There are tons of solutions out there, but I haven't seen a single one that has got the patchwork of solutions that will give us this energy transition right yet. So that means we still need a lot of innovation, and it is those inclusive environments that bring about those innovations. And so I think there's just something about the narrative, the way we talk about net zero, making it a more complete conversation, that then means that you can introduce diversity by stealth almost into the conversation.
Thank you very much. I was very quick.
So that's a very interesting point, because it speaks to the intersectionality piece about it. Yes, we're talking about climate change, but we also need to look at how nuanced it is, and the fact that, some people who have played a very tiny role in the actual bigger issue are going to be facing the biggest part of the challenge. And I know top of my head of a climate change activist called Michaela Loeb. I don't know if you're familiar with her. She's released a book. I've forgotten the name of her book, so if you remember, please do shout it out.
I'll Google it.
Thank you. She has written a book kind of talking about her journey, but also looking at it from a very intersectional lens, and she's spoken at great length about it. But it's really getting and it would have been great to see someone else from your office coming here to kind of actually listen in on this conversation, because often what tends to happen is like the people of color or the people who are already dealing with all these issues are the ones who are now having to talk about it. But going back to your actual question, I think really it's looking at it from an intersectional lens and understanding that this is a very nuanced challenge. We all breathe the same air. If something were to happen, and if it affects our world as we know of it, everyone is going to be a victim to it. So it has to be a collective goal. And once we look at the structural imbalances that exist when it comes to power, when it comes to resources, when it comes to actual ability to create change, then it becomes clearer that we need to make sure that we're working together and that we're carrying everyone along, but that we are also listening to people. When COP26 came to the Scottish space, there was a lot of conversations that was being had even at my university, really thinking about it from this really nuanced lens. And we just need to have more of these conversations, but also start making action and start doing the actual brunt of the work towards really moving that needle and making that change possible.
Thank you. Kirsty.
We can't achieve net zero decarbonisation without an inclusive kind of space society, and it's going to require all of us. And I think the effects that comes from not decarbonising is that it's fuel poverty, it's increased heating bills. This affects everyone, and it's not something that anyone can get away from. So until everyone kind of accepts that we need to all do this together and that we need to hear from all different voices and all different innovative perspectives, we're not going to then be able to create a change. So it's about that kind of collaborative approach. We always say that we're kind of best we work together.
Thank you. And now I'm going to close, but I'm going to ask you within 30 seconds each, 30 and I'm counting, to just leave us with one final question. What have been the two most important key learns for successful inclusivity that we can take away to further diversity, inclusion, anti-racism? Just two within 30 seconds. Who's ready to go?
I can go first.
Go on, first. Always ready.
Every one of us has a dream, and everyone deserves to be afforded the equal right to be able to realize their dream. And my tagline on LinkedIn, when I've been making noise for the past couple of years about my journey, has always been your dreams and identity and identities in some cases are valid too. And I just want us all to just carry on the work that we are already doing when it comes to just making that a possible thing, making it possible for everyone to be afforded the same right to dream. And who knows, in the next couple of years, we would have more stories of trailblazing young people who have come into this field and are killing it because we have already set the precedent and the foundation for them.
Thank you.
I'm going to just say killing it every time now, just to sound young again. Again, building on what's been said, I will say that nothing happens, nothing can be improved that isn't, or can't be measured, that can't be, nothing that isn't measured or acknowledged can be measured, what I meant to say. We need to acknowledge that there is a problem. We cannot improve what we can't measure. So we need to spend some time actually taking those collective and quantitative collection of data so that we know exactly where we are, and so that we can champion the right causes. And champions only get so far without allies. And so those are the things I would like to leave us with today.
Yeah, I mean, I think mine would be have the uncomfortable conversation, because it's probably nowhere near as uncomfortable as a lot of people feel. And it's so important to ask the questions and really immerse yourself in how all other types of people feel, so that we can then kind of all make a change together.
Thank you. And I know I'm the person between you and the lunch, so I will just finish off by saying, I like something you said there, and I want to pick up on it. Often we look at the quantitative data. How many people do we have? Please consider the qualitative data. What quality of these people, what quality of life are they experiencing in those workspaces? I also want to pick up on the last question around the way we think about human beings and the way we think about people's experiences. When we see the war and whatever is happening, I want us to really consider that there is a human element in all these experiences that we have. And in that human element, I want us to think, over the years, we've had so much talk, but we don't speak and have these uncomfortable conversations. And in this uncomfortable conversation, let's consider what it looks like to continue to perpetuate harm because we don't acknowledge white privilege, or we do not acknowledge the superiority that has been embedded in our systems and processes because we've promoted whiteness as the model to work with. Now we need to consider the fact that there is so much more around diversity. There is more around how we could work together. When we speak about human rights, and I'm speaking about this in a space where we talk about business and all that, but I want us to go back to the core of human rights. You talk about the opportunity for everybody. That comes from us thinking about human rights. The first conversation on human rights was on race relations. That is the inception of human rights. Human rights then led to what we know as the equality duty, public sector equality duty. And if you're funded by the public sector, you know about the public sector equality duty. That is where that was a conversation on racism and on the Stephen Lawrence murder. So when we are talking about human rights, we cannot talk about human rights and not talk about race, and not talk about ethnicity, and not talk about the privilege that we have promoted above the experiences of people. What does human rights do? It centers the lived experiences of those that have been harmed and oppressed. So in your workspaces, if you're thinking, and the Human Rights Bill is going to come out soon, but when we're thinking about work, what are you centering? The conversation has to center the realities of these people. And I'll leave you with two last things. The first is that, as you said, we are all very smart people. It sounds like a complex issue, but it is not. We can all do it, and we can all do it together. An African quote, one of the African quotes says, if you want to go quickly, go alone. And if you want to go far, go together. Go with others. And lastly, you talked about music. When the music changes, the dance must change. Do not be out of step. Let's all dance together. Thank you very much.